Okay, well that was worst case scenario. I couldn't show the whole thing on tape because it took me about a half hour to do it. But I ended up cutting with the disc on the Dremel the material here. Okay, there's about a 1/4 inch and that's recessed. You can get rid of quite a bit of it as long as you maintain some threads in there. So what I ended up having to do is drill it out. Okay, here's the one that came out. That little pin right there. This is what it looks like in there. So I drilled out the top, and then this was able to drop out. But the key is you got to step your bits up. Go to the smallest bit that'll fit in there, and just drill it down, just past those threads, and keep stepping up your drill bits until you hit the threads around the hole there. And if you're careful, you won't damage the threads. Now I did have to, the new needle, I did have to kind of work it in there with some oil and everything, but it's fitting in there nice now. It's a little tight, but that's not going to matter. The key is when you put that needle in there, okay, in the throat of the carburetor, the tip of that needle, as soon as it starts to come, there's a hole inside here. Run your finger through there. As soon as that starts to come through that hole, stop, because you'll damage the needle. If you can get it to at least come to that hole, you're good. So now all I got to do is just clean this up. The insides, blow out all the passages, and we'll put it back together. We're all cleaned up. I blew it out with the compressed air, got all the dirt out of it. So now everything goes back together. Idle adjustment. Spring goes in first, followed by the O-ring. Washer. Washer's always on top of the O-ring because the needle's going to ride on that so you don't chew the washer up. That gets inserted in there. Helps if you got little fingers.
Tell me about it. Displays, ornaments, decorations, banners, posters, boxes, packing materials, mannequins, and this is some expensive square footage. I'm paying a lot of money to store this junk.
Now the moment of truth. See if that's actually going to thread in there. I don't know. With that needle in there. It was tight, but I only have to do it once. Now you have to do your final adjustment once you get the machine running. And I got my finger in the inside here. I'm waiting until I can just feel that needle start to protrude. And I'm going to stop, and I did. So that means it's bottomed out. And then I want to come back one turn. There's a half. There's one. So that's your starting adjustment. And that's probably not going to be easy to adjust once I get it in the machine, but I'll just have to see what happens here. Okay. Back to this side. That drops in, that plastic piece. Oh, there's an O-ring inside there. Don't forget that. Okay. Everything just goes in the reversal when you took it out. Okay, and then that drops in. Sometimes it drops in the wrong way. It should go straight in. That was the first piece we took out. Not all the time. Okay, now that's got to sit flush in there. Sometimes you got to manipulate this baby a little bit. The way you drop it in, getting it lined up is the hardest part. I'll show you. If you have a problem getting it in there, there's a pin on this side here and a groove. So the pain in the butt part is trying to line that pin up with that groove as you set it in there, because if you don't, it's not going to sit straight. So you kind of just have to drop it in there and hope you get it lined up just right. If you don't, it won't fall through. Then you got to turn it somehow. Reach down in there. You'll know what I'm talking about. It'll slide right in there once you hit that groove. There. So when that sits in there completely, it'll protrude out the end in that groove. Okay, and you got to hold that there. I usually use this punch on this side here, like that. Okay. Otherwise, it's just going to keep falling out on you. You just keep replacing the pieces just as you put them back in with the new pieces. That's why you got to take a picture, because you're going to forget. All of these, anything that's brass here is just snug, not tightened real tight, because it'll strip. So as soon as it just gets a little tight, stop. You don't want it too tight. Okay? Next piece is the other jet. Okay, and this was the recessed one that you need the little screwdriver for. Where'd I put that screwdriver? Those are those little jeweler screwdrivers. They're not really made for this, but they fit perfect. And that one's just tightened down till it's snug. Okay. And after that, it's time to put the seat in. This is where the needle sits, and it comes with a new needle that sits in there like this. And that's what closes off your gas. So that was the problem with this carburetor. It's got an O-ring. It just presses in there by hand. That's it. After that comes the float assembly. And that you kind of have to put in with a needle nose. It's kind of tight in there. It goes right back in the same way you took it out. Except you're just using new parts now. It really does help if you got little tiny fingers. It's got a clip in there that loops over. Getting the right angle is sometimes the problem. You don't want to squeeze this too hard, because if you bend that, it's not going to sit right. Okay, so that just sits in there like that. New needle's in there. That gets pressed in this way. And it can only go one way, so if you forget how this goes, it'll only fit in there one way. That just gets pressed in by hand. Now it's time to put the bowl back on. New gasket. And this too can only go one way. Make sure you take that old one off of there. Make sure that surface is nice and clean. Let me clean that up. Okay, we're almost there. So clean up the surface to your bowl. Put the new gasket on. It can only go one way. And before you put the bowl back on, you need to make sure that needle is actually sitting, because you don't want to get it all back together, put it on the unit, and then have it leak, because you're going to have to do the job all over again. Okay, so there's the gas inlet right there, and with it in this position, the float is closed, so that needle's shut. You shouldn't be able to blow through it. It's sealed. Flip it over, and you can blow through it. So if you can do that, it's not going to leak gas. Now, I know you probably shouldn't be blowing in there, but if you can find a better tool to do this, let me know. This works. Okay, put your bowl back on there. This is always tricky. That rod has got to sit right down in between the float assembly. So sometimes you put this in, it just doesn't seem to line up right. You got to just kind of mess around with it a little bit. It will go back in there. It's like a puzzle. So there you go. Press it down nice and tight. Check, make sure it fits right. It does. Get your screws back in there. And these do not have to be that tight. When this guy took this apart, he put them way too tight. And that's why I had to use that impact driver to get them off. It just holds gas. There's no pressure in it or anything. So it doesn't really need to be that tight. Hand tight. Both sides. And then a quarter turn. That's all you need. Okay, at this point, do the test one more time. Then make sure that you didn't bind something up and that float is moving. So I can blow through it on one side and not the other. So this carburetor is sealed, it's ready to go. Okay, now the last thing to install on this thing is that diaphragm. And that goes right back in the way you took it off. Okay, that big long spring just gets seated right down. Oh, just gets seated right down in the center there. Right after, there it is. The diaphragm goes in first, and this can only go in one way. It's got to line up. There's a hole, that piece down there. There it is. Lines up with the metering rod you put in earlier. Okay. Make sure that that's seated right. And this goes right back on top of it. Down like that. Screw that in. Okay, all back together, ready to go. Don't worry if you got some spare parts. Some of these kits, they cover different model years, so you could have a couple parts that are left over. They don't all use the parts that the kit comes with. So, with a little time, patience, lots of pictures, you can do it yourself. If not, give me a call.